Too many games nowadays view open worlds as an obligation, rather than an opportunity to expand on their gameplay ideals and themes. My favorite example of this is LA Noire. While the open world is fun to explore and beautifully realized, if the resources spent on making that world were reallocated to better voice acting, more and more nuanced missions, or better optimization, I think it would be remembered as the wholly unique and innovative game it is, rather than as GTA's smarmy cousin. But that's off topic for today's essay. Today, I'd like to talk about Far Cry 2, and specifically how its open world is as much a character as the open world in any RPG, or GTA game for that matter. Before I start, it's worth noting that I've only ever played Far Cry 2 to completion with a realism mod, which is comparable to the infamous difficulty, but with gun damage higher, so that people in t-shirts can't take as many shots, and other small tweaks like that. I think it's one of the only games that actually suits a realism mod. Far Cry 2 was one of the earliest Ubisoft games to use the formula that they're so well known for today. Big open world, dots all over the map, do the same thing over and over again. However, that monotony is made fun due to the sheer difficulty of the game and the slow progression of unlocking weapons. Fast travel is nearly non-existent. You can take buses to one of 5 locations on the 2 maps, but you first have to get to that bus stop, which can require sometimes 15 minutes of navigating. At any point while driving, either to a bus stop or your target of choice, an enemy car could appear, and believe me when I say that these can be some of the most dangerous encounters in the game. You have practically no cover, save for your car and the surrounding landscape, and the enemies barreling towards you with one driving and one on the deadly mounted gun. Depending on the loadout you're using, you'll want to heavily gravitate towards driving off-road, or even just walking if you want to get to your objective without risking a 5-second death. You're in constant danger, whether it's from enemy convoys, malaria, getting lost, or just wandering too close to a camp. To survive that danger, you'll need to use a fair bit of creativity. The game offers dozens of weapons that lend themselves to wildly varied strategies. One of my particular favorites involved a silenced pistol and 2 sniper rifles. You rest until it's pitch dark outside, sneak through an enemy outpost to a high ground position, use your pistol to silently kill anyone who's close enough to cause you problems while sniping, wait for one enemy to get out into the open, in your line of fire and far from cover, and then you take your weaker sniper rifle and shoot him in the leg. He'll fall down screaming, alerting the entirety of the area you just snuck past, and depending on where you hit him, he'll either slump his way to cover, or just lay there waiting for rescue. And this is where you come in. The screaming guard draws out his teammates to try and help him up, and you can use your more powerful sniper rifle, in my case the single-shot kill entirely silent dart rifle, to pick off everybody who tries to help him. If there are too many people trying to advance through cover to get to you, you can easily slow them down by legging another one with your weaker rifle, spreading out the area of screaming casualties, thus causing more of the soldiers to focus on helping their friends rather than on advancing you. Sounds like a pretty bulletproof strategy, doesn't it? But here's the thing about Far Cry 2. Sometimes it isn't dark, sometimes there isn't high ground for easy sniping, and most of all, sometimes you mess up. If you take a silenced pistol for stealth infiltration, you can't have a MAC-10 for damage control when you mess up. If you take a sniper rifle, you can't have the silenced MP5 for slightly less reliable stealth, and if you take the dart rifle, you can't have a flamethrower, RPG, or mortar. There's a wide range of weapons in Far Cry 2, but unlike in future games, each one can only go in one specific slot. You have a primary, secondary, and special, but you can't mix and match. This means that the player will never have a perfect loadout, one that lends itself well to more than a handful of situations. And because of that, you either have to face the dangerous open world more to switch loadouts once you've scouted an area, or do your best to work with what you've got. Another, totally different strategy I like to use is to take a Desert Eagle, a silenced MP5, and a mortar. The main issue with the mortar is that it takes much more skill than I have to make your first shot accurate on target. To counter this, you can fire a flare shot that doesn't do damage, but instead shows you where you're aimed at for your explosive shot. I'd go out in the middle of the day and get to a far off, higher up position and target the biggest, shadiest area. On sunny days, shady spots are where you'll find the bulk of the enemies waiting for something to alert them. So I'd fire my flare mortar, alerting them, but not making them spread out so much that I can't handle it. Then I'd immediately get my explosive mortar out on that shady location to kill as many as I can before the chaos has taken over the camp and spread them out. I'd take my Desert Eagle and immediately rush towards the camp, using its decent range to kill anyone wise enough to push towards where my mortars were fired. And then, using the silenced MP5, I'd circle my way around the outside perimeter of the camp, picking off guys wherever I saw them. taking advantage of the chaos I'd cause to seem like a ghost, striking from all directions. The enemy is unable to get a fix on me for too long before I vanish to another part of the camp. Sure, I might take a few hits, and it definitely won't be as clean as my sniping strategy, but hey, it gets the job done in situations where sniping won't. Because of the constant danger in Far Cry 2 and your incredibly weak health bar, you have to stay on your toes. Moments of empowerment like this are undercut by the constant near-death experiences you have to endure to get to them, and the fact that it's incredibly hard to keep track of all the enemies once chaos ensues. There are no perfect executions in Far Cry 2. Something will always go wrong. It's always sloppy. And even the most well-thought-out strategy will leave you vulnerable to something or other. Now let's look briefly at the themes of the game, and how these elements brought on by the open world reinforce them. When the Jackal first meets you, he says that every living being seeks only to discharge its power, like a gorilla thumping its chest. I find this is true, from a drunk at a bar starting a fight with somebody, to a scholar using big words and sitting on a high horse. And hey, I'm sure it's even part of the reason I do these videos. A sort of ego-driven desire to showcase some knowledge. You can probably apply this quote to your life also. Meanwhile, in Far Cry 3, as I'm sure you all know, Voss says that the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over, expecting things to change. I think it's interesting that these two quotes are in their respective games, since in Far Cry 3, all Jason seeks is to discharge his power. That's why he gets so mad when Lisa tries to remind him of his weak Hollywood side, that only gets jobs because of her ex-boyfriend setting them up for him. He was powerless there, no matter how rich he was, and on the island, he can finally play out his desire to be powerful. You do the same thing over and over in Far Cry 3, and it does make a difference. Meanwhile, in Far Cry 2, every time you finally get the upper hand in the story and kill one of the ruthless leaders of either faction, another one quickly comes in to replace them. You capture an enemy outpost in the morning, just for it to be replaced by a new set of 20-year-old boys in the evening. You do the same thing over and over, and nothing changes. There's always going to be a war in this fictional country, and in your efforts to stop it, you're probably just making the whole thing worse. So while the game says every living being seeks to discharge its power, I'd say that the more prominent theme from a gameplay and narrative perspective is Voss's definition of insanity. In Far Cry 2, you go through all the trouble I mentioned earlier just to do something that is most likely not for the greater good, and ultimately counterintuitive to your goal of killing the Jackal to slow down the war he sparks. You'll crawl through, surviving on the skin of your teeth, just to shoot a young man in the leg and bait out his friends trying to help him, and you'll do it for nothing but a short 1-minute advantage. The player and their chosen character may set out on their journey with good intentions, but the world around them, the open world to be specific, quickly turns them into a monster, desensitizing them to the horrors they commit because it's just the easiest way to stay alive. Every time you wipe out an enemy roadblock, there's just silence. All the young natives are dead, maybe one is just wounded, hiding under a piece of cover hoping you don't see him. The whole place is on fire and carnage is everywhere, and rather than reflect on what's happened, it's time to just move on and start the next fire. And for what? Because that outpost had ammo or morphine. Another big part of Far Cry 2's gameplay is the buddy system. You'll meet characters throughout the game who revive you if you're taken out in combat, and who offer you secondary objectives on story missions to make your primary objective easier. Not morally just, in fact sometimes the alternate paths are more monstrous, but easier. You don't do those side objectives because you like the buddy, or because it's for the greater good. You do them because doing buddy missions upgrades your safe house. The game teaches you to view your only friends as a means to an end, and when one of them is inevitably wounded fighting by your side, the game offers you the choice of either overdosing them with morphine, abandoning them, or just shooting them in the head. That morphine's valuable stuff. You probably shouldn't waste a few syrettes on a dead man, so odds are you just shoot them.
It's the only way.
You've used them up, and now they've outlived their usefulness, so it's time to shoot them and move on to the next one. You're a terrible, terrible person in Far Cry 2, and you have to work so hard to get there. So there's my take on the themes of the game, and while it's already apparent that the world encourages you to work hard to do a terrible thing for very slight personal gain, let's keep looking at how the open world reinforces those themes. You're in a dangerous place, from the malaria to the distance to the enemies, and your goal is to conquer it, though it can never be conquered for more than a brief few moments. When you're not on top, the goal is just to survive. You can visit safe houses which you've captured, the only thing in the game that actually stays captured, to resupply on ammo, syrettes, or to switch out your weapons for ones you've stashed away. However, those safe houses are few and far between, so most of the time if you want to resupply, you'll need to take out an enemy roadblock, which are marked on the map based on the type of supplies you can get there. killing 10 or so young men for those supplies, just because you don't want to go all the way to a safe house or weapon shop. However, these roadblocks also serve another function, to make it harder to get from point A to point B, to block the road. Along with the convoys I mentioned earlier, this just further encourages the player to drive far off-road or go on foot when that's not an option. The open world makes it very clear that you're not supposed to be here. You're a foreigner, who thought he could solve some other country's problems with some good old first world intuition, and you only make things worse for everybody. I think in this sense, the idea of every living being seeking to discharge its strength does fit well with the game. You thought you had all the answers, so you kept going on your quest, even once it's clear that you've done much more bad than good for these people. The only brief respite from the dangers of the open world is in the ceasefire zones. Everyone has guns. Towards the end of the game, everyone recognizes you and wants to shoot you, though they can't. And until then, you're just another nameless soldier here to pick up another morally unjust mission from factions that don't want to publicly associate with you. You get bad looks from everyone you pass, and at a few points in the game, you're even asked to kill people in these ceasefire zones. These people don't want you here. You're a plague on their already damaged nation, only serving to further fracture the barely standing peace where there is any. Let's also look at one of my favorite touches in the game, the physical map you have to hold to navigate the world. Driving while reading the map is dangerous. It's not too hard to get in a wreck because of it, and it certainly keeps you off your toes in case of a drive-by ambush. You can't look at your map while swimming, so oftentimes you'll be getting more lost by the second just hoping that you can find land soon enough before you get too far off track, and hoping even more that you don't accidentally swim your way towards an enemy camp. On top of that, the fact that you can't shoot a weapon while using the map just furthers the chaos of combat. You may start out trying to get to a specific point during a fight, and end up on the complete other side of the camp. The people don't want you here, and through the use of the map and level design, it becomes clear that the land doesn't want you there either. This is not your place. You're out of your element. The last element of the game's open world I'll touch on is the huge outposts. Sometimes you'll have to enter them to complete an objective, but generally, you'll want to stay as far away from these areas as possible. Sometimes you'll go on lengthy sidetracks just so you won't have to go near them, much like how it's often advantageous to drive off-road to avoid convoys and roadblocks. Just furthering the idea that you shouldn't be here, and that danger is all around for someone who shouldn't be here. The people around you are fighting for their homeland, while you're just fighting as an evil, self-righteous, ego-driven vacation. They don't want you here, and with every day you survive, you're only making things worse for them. The game mechanics, the people, and the landscape itself only wishes for you to die.